Hello everyone. I have had the idea for this video for very long time. I just haven't got around making it. The idea, I got this from some comment that Cloudy Milder made in one of his videos, although it didn't have anything whatsoever to do with this video. It was just that when he said something, it made me think of something else, which made me think of something else, which made me think of something else. You know, sometimes your thoughts sort of bounces around like a pinball in a pinball machine. So it made me think that back in the 80s, I did consider myself to be a big metal fan. But looking back, how big of a metal fan was I in reality? So I came up with the way of showing every band that I listened to back in the 80s and every record that I owned back in the 80s. So let's get started. The first band and the first metal record that I owned was Kiss' Rock and Roll Over. And during the 80s, and I want to stress out that this video is just about the records that I owned during the 80s. I bought all Kiss records except for Hot in the Shade and the compilation Smashes, Trashes and Hits. But when I started listening to Kiss, I wanted it to be just Kiss. I didn't want to listen to any other metal band. Being a metalhead was the furthest thing from my mind. I didn't like the idea at all. No, didn't want to be a metal fan, just Kiss. But then I heard Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast, and it was so good that there was no way to deny the quality of it. So I bought that one as my first, but I thought I would show Peace of Mind, because this was the first Iron Maiden album that I heard. And I bought all Iron Maiden albums released during the 80s, including the Made in Japan EP. Looking back, it wasn't a long time, but at the time I remember thinking that I remained with those two bands for a very long time. But yeah, it wasn't a long time. But anyway, the first band that started like spreading out, expanding my metal horizon was AC/DC, Flick of the Switch. I probably bought this as my first AC/DC record simply because it was the first record that I came across. And I bought every AC/DC album, including the Jailbreak 74 EP and the two Australian album releases. Next up, Scorpions, Love at First Sting, and I bought all Scorpions albums from Taken by Force to Worldwide Live and Fly to the Rainbow. Twisted Sister, Stay Hungry. I bought the Stay Hungry and You Can Stop Rock and Roll. I did hear both Under the Blade and Come Out and Play, but didn't buy those in the 80s. And to this day I still haven't heard Love is for Suckers album. Bon Jovi. I bought all 4 Bon Jovi albums, and I can say that I became a fan right from the start, because I bought this album very shortly before the release of 7800 Degrees album. Mötley Crüe, Too Fast for Love. I bought all 5 albums. Hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, all 5 albums from Mötley Crüe during the 80s. And this one was first big surprise to me. I've always considered myself to be a big Rainbow fan, so obviously I thought that I bought all Rainbow albums during the 80s, but I didn't. I bought Rising, On Stage, Long Live Rock and Roll, Difficult to Cure, Bent Out of Shape, and Final Vinyl. So I didn't buy first album, Down to Earth, Straight Between the Eyes, or the compilation Best Of. Again, surprise, Wasp, The Last Command. I bought the first 3 albums, and I would have expected the first album to be my first Wasp album, but no, this was my first one. I did buy Inside the Electric Circus, but didn't like it, sold it later on. Also heard the Live in the Raw album, but that was it. Again, surprise, Dio, Sacred Heart. I would have thought that Holy Diver was my first Dio album, but it wasn't. It was this. But actually, Holy Diver was the very next album that I bought. But yeah, I bought Holy Diver, Last in Line, Sacred Heart, and Intermission. Again, surprise, Gary Moore, Corridors of Power. I would have expected to have bought more Gary Moore albums during the 80s, but I only bought this one, Victims of the Future, Wild Frontier, Dirty Fingers, and possibly After the War. After the War was released in 89, and I do remember buying it as a second hand, so it might have been later than 80s, but possibly in 89. Van Halen, 1984. I bought all 6 albums with David Lee Roth and 5150, which I later sold on, and now it has been on my shopping list for at least 4 years. And I have seen it dozens of times, but just never got around buying it. Keel, Final Frontier. I bought all 4 Keel albums and later sold Lay Down the Law and The Right to Rock. David Lee Roth, Eat a Man Smile, bought both of his solo albums, this one and Skyscraper, also the EP Crazy from the Heat. Okay, this is one band that I have wondered for a very, very long time. Saxon, The Eagle Has Landed live. During the 80s I only bought this one and Innocence Is No Excuse. I did hear several of their albums back in the 80s, but for some reason I only bought these 2 albums. And I have wondered about that for very, very, very long time. '09, Intrigue, the only Finnish metal album that I like during the 80s. And I only bought this one and the previous album to this, White Lines, which I sold later on. During the recent years I have bought all of their albums from the 80s, except for White Lines. I still don't have that one. Yeah, back in the 80s I listened to very little Finnish metal. Besides '09 I heard about 10 Finnish metal albums, but didn't really like any of those. This to me is still the Finnish masterpiece. Y&T, In Rock We Trust. I bought this one, Down for the Count, and Open Fire, and also bought Open Fire on VHS, but I sold both of those for much. Surprisingly that I didn't buy records like Black Tiger or Mean Streak. Also heard Contagious. When was 10 released? I don't know if that was during the 80s. Also heard that one. And what was the earlier one? Earthshaker. Yeah, I heard them all. For some reason I only bought those 3 albums. Cinderella, Night Songs, both of their albums during the 80s. Another Finnish band, Peer Gynt. I know that many people do count them as metal. To me they are a hard rock band, but since I keep their records within my metal collection I decided to show this one too. But all of their 4 albums and 2 EPs they released during the 80s. Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers, the only Deep Purple album that I bought during the 80s. Besides this I only had a 12-inch single of Smoke on the Water, which I since sold that one too. Judas Priest, British Steel, bought 4 albums. This one, Priest Live, Unleashed in the East and Turbo, and I've since sold Unleashed in the East and Turbo, and it's looking at it now it's very surprising because Unleashed in the East has been my favorite Priest album for many years, but back in the 80s I didn't like it. Ace Frehley's debut solo album outside of Kiss, Frehley's Comet. I bought they're both 2 albums and the live EP, Live Plus One. And this one was second massive surprise to me. Thin Lizzy, Live and Dangerous. Just like with Rainbow, I've always considered myself to be a massive Thin Lizzy fan. So I did expect to own every album from Fighting to Live, because I did remember that I bought Nightlife a bit later. But I didn't. I only bought this one, Black Rose, Chinatown, Renegade, Thunder and Lightning, and Live. Huge surprise, huge surprise to me. I really thought that I bought them all, but no, only those few albums. Ozzy Osbourne, The Ultimate Sin. I bought this one, although this is a copy that I bought during the 80s, but this is the second copy because my first copy was a picture disc. So I bought this one. Randy Rhoads Tribute and Bark at the Moon. And this one was also a big surprise. Metallica, Ride the Lightning. I was absolutely certain that Master of Puppets was my first. And when I thought about it, it was my first, but I bought that one first as a cassette. That's why Ride the Lightning was my first album on vinyl. And I bought Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. And the Carriage Stage Revisited EP. Okay, this one was again a huge surprise to me. Yeah, Aerosmith Classics Live. I was absolutely certain that Permanent Vacation was my first one, but somehow I got around buying this one first. Like I've said, I keep my metal records in the order in which I purchased them. So when I go to my record shelf, I remember if I'm looking for some album, I'm like, okay, it's there. So I remember where the records are, but if you ask me which records are next to it, I have no memory whatsoever. That's why this was a huge surprise to me. I was absolutely certain that Permanent Vacation had been my first, but no, it wasn't. During the 80s, I bought surprisingly many Aerosmith albums because I haven't considered myself to be a big Aerosmith fan, but I bought the 2 Classics Live albums, Permanent Vacation, Rocks, Toys in the Attic, Pump, Greatest Hits, and I also bought Night in the Ruts and Live Bootleg, and those 2 I have since sold. Again, bit of a surprise to me. Megadeth, Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good, because my introduction was Peace Sells, so I would have expected to buy that one next as the first one, but somehow I got around buying this one first, but actually Peace Sells was the very next metal album that I bought. Okay, this one is a bit difficult. Motorhead, No Remorse. During the 80s, I only bought No Remorse and No Sleep Till Hammersmith. And this is now my third copy of this album. I originally had the one with the leather sleeve, and I sold it. And once I sold that, I used the space, obviously. So when I bought the second copy, I don't remember the details. I just remember that I had some kind of a problem as to where to put it. Do I put it in the place of the original copy, or do I place it as the most recent purchase? Yeah, like I said, I don't remember what it was, but I did place this next to Hammersmith Oden, No Sleep Till Hammersmith, so I don't remember which one did I actually purchase first, Hammersmith or this one, but they have been on my shelf in this order for decades, so No Remorse. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, both of their albums, this one and Lies. Next one. Kingdom Come, debut album, both of their 2 albums. Philip Lynott album, both the two albums. And yeah, hold on. Let's move a bit. Yeah, sorry about that. Now the few albums that I don't know where to place them in chronology. First of all, a couple of cassettes, because obviously these are placed within the vinyl albums. Peter Criss, Out of Control, and one that I have wondered for decades, Whitesnake, Saints and Sinners. During the 80s, I bought 3 Whitesnake albums, Saints and Sinners, Slide It In, and 1987. And I loved especially Saints and Sinners and Slide It In. I did really like 1987, just not with the same intensity that I love these two. So I have wondered for decades, like, why didn't I buy anything more? It took me into the early years of 1990s before I bought Come and Get It, and a lot longer, maybe about 15 years before I finally bought the rest of the early albums. But yeah, why didn't I buy anything more? I don't know, but I love these albums. Def Leppard, Pyromania, only bought this one, and Hysteria. Anthrax, Penny Confession EP. This is the only thing that I bought besides 2 singles. And Rat, Dancing Undercover. I bought the Invasion of Your Privacy and this one, and I sold both of these albums. Now I have bought this one again. I still haven't bought Invasion of Your Privacy. So yeah, no idea where this one would belong within chronology. Okay, then we come to the end of 1980s. The very last metal album that I bought during the 80s was AC/DC, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, the Australian version. And while we're at it, the very first album of the 90s that I bought was Ace Frehley, Trouble Walking, released in 1989. Okay, 1987 was the breakup point with me and metal. I bought the Dio's I Could Have Been a Dreamer 12-inch, and yeah, I just felt that that's it. I'm moving on. I'm starting to expand my musical horizons to different directions. But I didn't stop completely buying records. But the year 1987 turned out to be very much a cutoff point. This one, Kingdom Come, released in 1988, was the last one that I would buy from a band that released their debut album after 1987 for a very long time. I still kept on buying records, metal records, up until 1993, although the numbers did dwindle after 1987, but I still did keep on buying metal records up until about 1993. But after that, it pretty much dried up altogether. I just checked my records back there, and after 1993, up until about 2012, as I noticed, the AC/DC's Live at River Plate sort of like is my reignition point. During those years, 93 to 2012, I bought only about 30 albums, metal albums, during that period. And even after that, up until about 2005, when I bought Badlands. This was the first record that was really that was like a first album release from the band that was released after 1987 or after the Kingdom Come album, and this one was released as late as 1989. So how much is it? 15 years. 15 years I got moved on by 1 year. And even after this one, I looked at my collection there, and with this one, Badlands included, up until today, I have less than 10 bands who have released their debut albums after 1987. And one or two of those even have like their roots going way back, like Black Country Communion has Glenn Hughes in it, who started already in the early 70s. So like brand new bands releasing their albums, first albums after 1987, I have even less of those. So that's it for this time. Hope you like this. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment. Bye.